What's up, you guys? Today's animated series review is about a group of soldiers who are bonded together to stop an evil ruler threatening to take over the world, and I'm talking about GIJOE Extreme. GIJOE Extreme, the animated series, aired in 1995, consisting of 2 seasons with a total of 26 episodes. Now, for this review, as a disclaimer, please do keep an open mind, because this is not the G.I. Joe that you know and remember. This has nothing to do with the original G.I. Joe cartoon, nor does it resemble it and contain the same characters. Therefore, do not compare these series together, as this is its own thing under the same name. Our story takes place in the future, roughly in the year 2006. A new threat is emerging that goes under the name S.K.A.R, which stands for Soldiers of Chaos, Anarchy, and Ruin. And with that, in order to stop S.K.A.R from having world domination, a group of soldiers are enlisted in a special unit, whom are recruited by a man named Clancy, who is a representative for an organization called International Alliance. Seeing how they are highly qualified, each with unique skill sets that are vital for upcoming missions, they were given the code name G.I. Joe. So within the G.I. Joes, as the initial lineup, you have Lieutenant Stone, the leader, Sergeant Savage, Ballistic, who also goes by the name Eagle Eye, Harpoon, Freight, Mayday, Quick Strike, Black Dragon, and Metalhead. Then you have bonus recruits who appear on special missions like Tracker and his pet Lakota, Red McKnox, and more. As for S.K.A.R, you have Ironclaw the leader, Rampage, Inferno, the Silencer, Steel Raven, and Wreckage, whom we'll talk about later, but for now, we'll just say he's part of S.K.A.R. Then there's the 3 mercenaries and S.K.A.R soldiers. Now, 3 things to note here is that Season 1 is the only season of the 2 where the introduction of each episode gives you a slight briefing of what's to come, and not in a way that you would expect. Like any form of 90s glory, it has real-life actors and cheap CGI and green screens with terrible dialogues, acting, and voiceovers. I do give them credit for trying with their costumes, but it kinda makes you roll your eyes, making it unbearable, and would rather skip it unless you really want to watch it. However, it redeems itself as by the end of each episode, we get the infamous PSAs where you see kids making mistakes, and selective G.I. Joes come to address the issue to teach them a valuable lesson, and knowing is half the battle. And last, whenever extreme action sequences take place, sometimes they're drawn by heavy rock or metal music to save time with montages. Throughout the series, Ironclaw comes up with some kind of agenda to rule the world, by using the form and impersonating a ruler named Count Von Ronny from Khalistan. It's really a basic story, as most of the time it involves money, kidnapping, power, and authority. The G.I. Joes are located on G.I. Joe Island, where their headquarters is established, and often try to seek and destroy every hidden base S.K.A.R has created because they continue to recruit lost and misguided souls. But the real highlight here are the character developments that happen within the seasons that really get you hooked. For starters, you'll immediately question every motive Clancy has to offer because he's the sketchy dude in a suit with glasses who never smiles and takes everything seriously. Then there's Sergeant Savage, the oldest of the group. We get a glimpse of his backstory during the war and how he was a guinea pig after being captured and experimented on by these scientists, and further elaborates the scenario in a pilot series called Sergeant Savage and His Screaming Eagles. After awakening and discovering he has some sort of enhanced features, the really sad part here is that he learns that his wife and son are no longer alive, leaving an emotional fate to be accepted. Quick Strike gets a pretty awesome episode involving his loyalty to G.I. Joe as they question whether or not he can be trusted, because as his backstory serves, he was once working under S.K.A.R alongside his brother Jonathan, but once realizing that they were using recruits to experiment on, Quick Strike had the unfortunate circumstance to watch his brother turn for the worse and had to dwell on his loss. Thus hating S.K.A.R, but at the same time everyone else around him in the Joe team is on high alert. Rampage doesn't really have a strong story other than wanting to eliminate Ironclaw to become the new leader of S.K.A.R, but aside from aiding them in financial resources, whenever he gets pissed he turns into the Hulk. Then there's Inferno, and his backstory shares how he was bullied as a child for being poor and how he had nothing compared to the rich kids. This practically traumatizes him to become evil and gets vengeance, so truth be told, I'm kind of on his side and sympathize with him. And then there's my favorite, the big beast himself, Wreckage. Throughout Season 1, Wreckage is often conflicted with his appearance and his purpose in life, as his mechanical arm, super strength, and muscular body is a factor of him wanting to know about his past. His only memory serves him to recall he was experimented on after an incident in a war, and vividly sees the military being responsible for how he is now, thus joining S.K.A.R to get revenge, especially G.I. Joe. Furthermore, his story expands in Season 2, but we'll get to that shortly. In fact, his story actually intertwines with the character Freight, who becomes overwhelmed when he accidentally has Metalhead become injured and winds up quitting G.I. Joe to return back to his past profession, which was rejoining the football team. In one instance, we even get these 2 brawlers have an extreme fight scene which was pretty badass. However, once seeing his true purpose, it was an easy call but still takes it upon himself for his actions. The last 2 episodes of Season 1 is where shit goes down. Ironclaw eventually takes over and defeats G.I. Joe, and to add on, their G.I. Joe Island even gets destroyed, thus leaving the stakes to be extra high. And what I really like about these two episodes is that you can see just how powerful Ironclaw becomes when he overtakes the world, creating panic and chaos all over. But of course, G.I. Joe wouldn't give up that easily, because when they tried to retaliate and infiltrate Ironclaw's headquarters, we see an epic battle between Ironclaw and Lieutenant Stone with some crazy punches, firepower, and extreme moments. They eventually turn things around and successfully defeat Ironclaw and take down S.K.A.R as a big-ass explosion emerges. However, when the G.I. Joes are celebrating, Lieutenant Stone realizes that Ironclaw's body was not found in the rubble, and it leaves you on a cliffhanger showing Clancy to find it quite odd. Talk about a creepy ending. Then, as Season 2 begins, we get a new and shorter intro as the story continues right where we left off last time. The upside is they remove the human intros, but the downside is they get rid of the PSAs. So now, within this season, the remaining S.K.A.R recruits mourn the loss of Ironclaw and adapt to life without him. And the G.I. Joes get a new hangout spot, and Clancy becomes even more sketchy. But, lo and behold, we discover that he's now Ironclaw. Holy shit. Unbeknownst to the G.I. Joes, Clancy does his best to act on both sides, but things don't exactly go as planned for the G.I. Joes as certain missions are being sabotaged. Sergeant Savage accuses Metalhead of being a traitor after certain incidents, but despite proving he's innocent, everyone becomes on edge knowing that Ironclaw's body has not been found yet, and something is wrong within the intel for G.I. Joe. After another extreme battle, Lieutenant Stone ends up getting severely injured and heads into a coma. This causes everyone to lose trust in each other as Ironclaw can be anyone. However, it turns out that Lieutenant Stone is the only one that discovered Clancy is Ironclaw and almost gets killed for it, thus causing a huge evacuation and extreme battle at the hospital. As the episodes continue, Clancy becomes a bit suspicious by the rest and ends up going AWOL. So when G.I. Joe summons Tracker and Lakota for help, they eventually find out that the real Clancy is held captive on some unknown island in a bunker where he's practically possessed. Now that's creepy as hell. Although they manage to save Clancy once restoring his mind back into his body as Ironclaw fails to deceive the Joes, the story doesn't end here. We now get a side story taking us to Ballistic, who now goes by the name Eagle Eye, as his origins shows us a love triangle with a girl named Julia and a Silencer. As both compete to be the perfect marksman, the Silencer becomes jealous after being defeated and gets addicted wanting to be number one. Eagle Eye tries to warn the Silencer that relying on technology is not the way to become an excellent shooter, and although he captures Eagle Eye and puts him through rigorous tests, both end up having an extreme fight until the end of this episode makes the Silencer have an epic breakdown after being called pathetic, and it's probably one of my favorite episodes within the series. Now, remember when I talked about Wreckage and Freight earlier? Well, now both of their stories continue, as in one episode we go more in depth to Wreckage's past, and discover that he saved a man's life during the war, and after being brutally injured and was experimented on to become a monster, lo and behold, Freight remembers this story and shares someone named Eric once saved his life during the war. And when Freight tried to check up on him, the military stated that his comrade had died, thus having to leave the area and war grounds. On the other end of things, Wreckage thought that the military abandoned him, which had him hate the military and G.I. Joe this whole time. And seeing how both him and Freight once were buddies in a war, this changes everything. Although he eventually turns his back on S.K.A.R and fights Ironclaw in an extreme battle, and even helps G.I. Joe in their mission, Freight offers him to join G.I. Joe, but Wreckage declines, stating that he needs to find himself. However, he later says if and when the opportunity comes, he may accept. So now we get to our last two episodes of the series, where here it's full of plot twists and jaw-dropping moments. A common scenario throughout the series is that Sergeant Savage always suspects that Metalhead is a traitor, and even when finding evidence of a recruiting pamphlet, this doesn't convince the rest of the G.I. Joes as they're being alarmed. Metalhead ends up taking a breather by playing with his band and even gets interrogated by G.I. Joe during his time off and gets sent to jail for safety reasons. He gets rescued by a S.K.A.R soldier and is taken to their base, where after some convincing that S.K.A.R is the place to be, he joins the group, betraying G.I. Joe. Now that's badass. Later, through some twists and turns as a super duper shock, we learn that this was a plan by Lieutenant Stone all along, prolonging Metalhead's reputation in order to lead the G.I. Joes to S.K.A.R's secret headquarters, and having Sergeant Savage not aware of this, as it would make it believable. In one last attempt to destroy S.K.A.R, we see an extreme battle between Ironclaw, Black Dragon, Lieutenant Stone, and more, and gets his ass kicked. This becomes a victory that the G.I. Joes needed, and I'm not sure how things would have turned out for S.K.A.R after this, because the series was cancelled shortly after. It's a bittersweet ending, but a good one nonetheless. A cliffhanger or having Metalhead really be a traitor would have been a great ending, but I guess that's okay. This series is actually pretty good and better than I imagined. The best way to express my thoughts on this series is that it lives up to its name. This is frickin' GI Joe Extreme. There's tons of action, explosion, shooting, fighting, and extreme moments. Sure, some storylines can be forgettable or characters not being as strong as others, but I kid you not, you may enjoy the show for what it is. I mean, yes, it is a bad G.I. Joe show, but if you look at it from a perspective of a group of soldiers defeating a common enemy, it serves on a positive note. The graphics are unique, the voice acting is good, and again, the action is extreme. If some story arcs turn out to be more disastrous than optimistic, I think I'd like it a lot more. But the moral of the story here is that the good guys always win. Therefore, G.I. Joe Extreme the animated series gets a B-/B. Thanks for watching, be sure to give a like and subscribe for more SHARKTOONS, and I'll talk to you all next episode.